Hey everyone, and welcome back to a new video. The Warhammer 40,000 universe is filled with all manner of renegades and treacherous individuals, ranging from the traitorous Astartes that wage constant war in the name of the Chaos Gods, to the more radical members of the Imperium's inner factions. However, among the most infamous and perhaps most interesting are the various Renegade Space Marine chapters, loyalist Astartes who have either fallen to the Dark Powers or simply lost faith in the Imperium that raised and bred them. And today, I want to take a look at one of their more infamous brethren, Huron Blackheart, delving into his past and revealing how this character has reshaped not only the fate of his own chapter, but the Imperium as a whole too. And with that said, let's jump straight in. Even for a Space Marine, Huron's origins are tinged with the harsh realities of life in a galaxy at war. As a member of the Astral Claws chapter, whose records are lost thanks to the Edict of Obliteration placed upon them for their heresies, Huron and his brothers were charged with watching over the major warp rift known as the Maelstrom. As the seething energies of the warp ripped open the boundaries of reality, the Maelstrom became home to hordes of demons, sinister Xenos races, and the countless outcasts of humanity. However, while the Astral Claws and their allied chapters, known collectively as the Maelstrom Warders, sought to contain and push back these numerous threats, the reality of the Imperium's lumbering war machine began to take its toll. Slowly, more and more of the Maelstrom Warders chapters were redeployed to other conflict zones, leaving the Astral Claws more and more isolated by the very Imperium they sought to protect. It was in this fraught existence that Huron, known at the time as Luft Huron, rose through the ranks of his chapter, first coming to prominence as a scout during the later stages of the Reboss Crusade. Even for a new recruit, Huron quickly demonstrated his skills as both a natural and ferocious leader and an insightful tactician, displaying those traits time and time again as the Astral Claws battered back the constant flow of enemies surging from the Warp Rift. Soon enough, he earned the title of Captain of the Chapter's 3rd Company, and even greater acclaim as he and his battle brothers triumphed over enemy forces several times their size, thanks largely in part to Huron's innovative tactics. However, even the forces of the loyalist Astartes are prone to jealousy and envy, and Huron's rise to prominence earned him as many rivals as it did honours. To some, his ascension and the following he had built within the chapter was beginning to overshadow their own vows of loyalty to the Emperor and Imperium as a whole, and that was not something they could overlook. Yet, as the battles across the borders of the Maelstrom intensified, it became clear to the High Lords of Terror that reinforcements were certainly needed. As such, they pronounced an Edict Imperialis, ordering several Space Marine chapters to base themselves permanently on the fringes of the Maelstrom. Just as importantly, as veterans of the conflict there, the Astral Claws were given the high honour of commanding this new alliance of Maelstrom Warders, placing them in a substantial position of power and influence. Quick to act following this edict, the Astral Claws took command of an orbital station in the strategically vital Badab system, which later became their fortress monastery and personal base of operations. Soon, a sense of control and order began to permeate the Maelstrom zone once again, but it was short-lived. A series of Orc raids that had been rampaging through the Maelstrom's outer worlds suddenly pivoted to strike deep into the Badab sector. Taking to the fight, the Astral Claws unleashed the full might of their chapter, culling hundreds of thousands of Orcs and pushing the green tide back into the Maelstrom from whence it came. Up until this point, the chapter master of the Astral Claws, Rovik Blake, had held a personal vow that the chapter was never to enter the Maelstrom itself. For what reason he held this vow, it isn't known, but it was during this conflict with the Orcs that the chapter master decided to break it and pursued them into the Warp Rift. Tragically, it was the last time Blake would lead his chapter, as he was killed in single combat with the Orc war boss Vorg Manburner, forcing the Astral Claws to retreat, leaderless and bloodied. On their return to the Badab system, the Astral Claws began the process of appointing a new chapter master, but it did not take long. Huron, who had only solidified his following within the chapter during the recent campaigns, won the title by the overwhelming acclaim of his peers, becoming the youngest warrior in the Astral Claws' history to attain the esteemed rank. Huron quickly took to the role by reorganising the chapter's deployments, re-strengthening their depleted fleet, and adding captured Corsair vessels to their ranks to help the Astral Claws carry out more aggressive raids on the Maelstrom's many warring factions. He also established a Scorched Planet policy, increasing the stockpile of Exterminatus-class weapons in the chapter's arsenal and unleashing them on the numerous fringe worlds that had harboured Renegade ships in the past. In just a few decades, Huron had completely reshaped the tactics and forces of the Astral Claws in a manner that was almost unprecedented for Space Marine chapters. And yet, the results spoke for themselves. Victory after victory was claimed against ever more fearful odds, silencing both the Imperium's enemies and Huron's rivals. Soon enough, a new type of conflict came to the Badab sector: civil war. On the world of Badab Primaris, an attempted coup by some of the planet's ruling class quickly caught the attention of Huron and his Astral Claws, who stepped in to brutally crush the rebels and impose order once again on the Hive world. Aware of how the desire for rebellion and greed can lodge deep into the hearts of weak men, Huron ordered his battle brothers to execute the ruling class of Badab Primaris, along with any who held questionable moral views. He then immediately established himself as the planet's governor, stylizing himself as the Tyrant of Badab, and claimed all the inhabited worlds in proximity to the Badab system as his chapter's fiefdom. The purge was not limited to Badab Primaris though. The Astral Claws set about cleansing all of the system's worlds of their privileged elite, establishing chapter watch bastions to ensure this new order would be maintained and the shadow of the chapter loomed over any who suspected otherwise. Huron even offered his closest allies and servants influential political positions in the new system, helping to cement his own influence and power alongside that of his chapters. The result was a new pocket empire on the fringes of the Maelstrom, watched over by the Astral Claws and other members of the Maelstrom Warders, and all under the command of Huron himself. And it wasn't just through his Space Marines that Huron cemented his own power. Seeing the need for system-wide enforcement, he radically reformed the Planetary Defence Force and used members of his own chapter to train them and embed their new tactical doctrine. This new Tyrant's Legion, as it was named, quickly proved itself by repulsing several Corsair raids, allowing the Astral Claws to take to the void and carry out their own raids on heretical and Xenos-controlled regions. In a complete reversal from their original stance all those years ago, the Astral Claws and their allied chapters were now on the offensive, and the wealth and tales of victory that flowed from Badab cemented Huron's reputation across the Imperium. However, while his reputation and glory grew to new heights, Huron held on to the bitter memories of the chapter's previous decline, and how the Imperium had left the Astral Claws isolated and adrift, while it had held the horrors of the Maelstrom at bay. Now, once again, the Imperium ignored their demands for greater reinforcements, leaving Huron facing another gradual war of attrition that the chapter could not hope to win in the end. So, in direct defiance of his duty to send the gene seed tithes that the chapter had promised to the Adeptus Mechanicus, he instead allowed his apothecaries to experiment and attempt to raise the chapter's numbers to levels not seen since the time of the original Space Marine legions. Despite numerous setbacks, mutations and failures, the Astral Claws soon numbered 3,500 battle brothers, making them one of the largest Space Marine chapters in the galaxy. To hammer his protests home, he also withheld Badab Primaris' planetary tithes to the Administratum and blocked all passages of trade, starving the wider Imperium of the resources it desperately needed in other conflicts. And while far from outright heresy, this did cement an immense tension between the Astral Claws and the High Lords, which only intensified when Huron ordered his warriors to cease focusing on the wider Maelstrom zone and instead diverted them and his resources to reinforcing the Badab sector specifically. In addition, using the sector's vast wealth, he built an extensive network of space defences and command stations named the Ring of Steel, which encircled the Badab system worlds and trade routes, preventing anything from entering or leaving without his permission. Huron also tore down the citadels of Badab's previous rulers and established a grand fortress known in legend as the Palace of Thorns, which was constructed to his own specifications and designs. As the Imperium and Huron pivoted and protested at one another, Huron became increasingly paranoid and power hungry. It was probably here that his corruption truly began to take hold, but with such devout following among the members of the Maelstrom Warders chapters, none intervened or attempted to remove him from power. Eventually though, this tension between Huron and the Imperium gave way to the full-scale conflict known as the Badab War. Now, a lot has been said about the Badab War, which is too vast to cover here, but in short, it can be said that the Maelstrom Warders, driven by Huron's hubris and confidence, struck out in open rebellion against the Imperium as the latter sought to defy the Ring of Steel and re-establish its own power over the Badab sector. In response, the Inquisition declared those renegade chapters excommunicate traitoris and paved the way for the Imperium to muster its armies and invade Huron's realm. This culminated in a final climactic battle between the Loyalist chapter, the Star Phantoms, and the Astral Claws in the heart of Huron's Palace of Thorns. As Huron struck down the commanding captain of the Star Phantoms, the fallen Loyalist detonated a melter charge at point-blank range, obliterating the right side of Huron's body. Leaderless once again, the remaining Astral Claws, a paltry 200 warriors at this point, were forced to pick up the remains of their wounded chapter master and retreat into the Immaterium. Ironically, despite all his efforts, the Astral Claws had fallen to the very fate that Huron had fought so hard to avoid, and he himself bore the gruesome scars of that failure. For several days and nights, the chapter's apothecaries and tech marines laboured over Huron's broken body, and on the 8th day, he finally managed to muster the strength to stand before the remnants of his once proud brethren, now followers of Chaos Undivided. And far from being the glorious warrior whose name had been praised by the High Lords themselves, Huron was now a walking body of scar tissue and machinery, his wound-chewed face twitching from an agony held back only by his iron will and hatred. It was at that point that Huron ordered his brothers to cast aside any oaths and remnants of loyalty. The Imperium had betrayed them, and so they would follow a new path. Repainting their armour in the crimson red of their murdered brothers, the Astral Claws became the Red Corsairs, and collectively agreed that if they could not live in honour, then they would rule in hell. It was with that they set out into the Maelstrom in search of new glories and conquest. As we've already mentioned, the Maelstrom up until this point had been the home to the countless renegades, Xenos pirates, mutants and outcasts of humanity. Demons walked across the planets, and dark whispers plagued the silence of starships who tried to traverse it. It was a place of horror, conflict, cruelty and bloodshed, and while the arrival of the Red Corsairs did nothing to abate that, they did offer an odd sense of order to the chaos. On arriving in the Maelstrom, Huron's forces quickly overcame the first pirates they found, slaughtering most of the Corsairs and allowing the survivors to swear themselves into slavish loyalty to the tyrant of Badab. From there, Huron killed the self-proclaimed kings, rulers and lords of the various worlds the Maelstrom had claimed, and broke any who defied him with a ferocity that even those who had seen the worst of the warp learned to fear. He claimed the populations of slave worlds, the manufactorums of vast void stations, and slowly, bit by bit, rebuilt a semblance of his lost realm of Badab within the warp. However, this time, he owed none of it to the Imperium and its masters. It was his alone, and he intended to keep it that way. Eventually, the masses of the Maelstrom named Huron the Blackheart, a name that he continues to wear as a title to this day. As Huron's power grew, so too did that of the Red Corsairs. Drawn by fate and rumours of a new master in the Maelstrom, renegade space marines from across the Imperium came to offer their loyalty before Huron's throne. It is said even to this day that the oath breakers of 100 different chapters follow the Blackheart into battle, their original chapter colours hidden by the red of betrayal. Mutation is also rife among the Corsairs, whose bodies have been bathed in the Immaterium, sometimes for hundreds of years, and several cabals, who follow all of the four Chaos powers, have established themselves among the Renegade forces. However, when it comes to the Red Corsairs, most speak of their ferocity in battle. Huron has been known to lead many of their raids in person, earning the nickname the Blood Reaver. And indeed, it is justified. Systems close to the Maelstrom, many whom Huron and the Red Corsairs once swore to protect, have suffered increasingly bold and bloody raids in recent decades. Stories of the survivors, and there are rarely any, have spoken of Corsair void ships appearing without warning, unloading overwhelming force and brutality onto their unsuspecting prey, and then disappearing almost as fast as they appeared. Huron has even conducted raids against his former Astartes brothers. On Villamus, he destroyed the gene stock of the Marines errant, condemning the chapter to a slow, inevitable death, and thus repaying them for their role in the fall of Badab. And at Perenxes, he destroyed a strike force of Space Wolves and Deathhawk Space Marines, taking their strike cruiser, the Wolf of Fenris, for himself and using it to launch other raids in the sector. More recently, at the height of the 13th Black Crusade, Huron has pledged to help Abaddon's forces in return for a truly coveted prize, one of the two Blackstone fortresses captured during the Gothic War, which he has since concealed in the Maelstrom for some unknown purpose. Now, as the Maelstrom swells with the power of chaos, Huron's power and influence have swelled to new heights too. His forces, using the nearby Great Rift, have been able to raid deeper and deeper into the Imperium, no doubt permitted so by some dark bargain with the Chaos Gods, and Huron himself has been sighted leading several raids seemingly simultaneously, albeit sectors apart. What's clear to some though is that Huron is currently waiting for something. His forces, vast as they are, have not been fully unleashed, leading some to speculate that some great conflict is in the making, perhaps even one to rival Abaddon's own Black Crusades. What some fear most of all, however, is that when the time comes, the Tyrant of Badab will return to claim the throne from which he was cast down, and a new greater schism will begin. So that is the origin story of Huron Blackheart. What do you make of him, and what do you think he's up to with that Blackstone fortress? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, a big thank you for watching today. If you liked the video, please do consider clicking the like button and subscribing to the channel for more content. And I do hope you'll join me for my next video. Until then though, take care.